guys, Jesse here, and this is going to be a comparison of the Galaxy Z Fold 2 and the Note 20 Ultra, and why I'm going for the Note and not the Fold. So I used the Z Fold 2 as my main daily driver phone for about 3 months, and I kind of came to the conclusion that it's just not really for me. So about a month ago, I actually got the Note 20 Ultra, and I've just been liking it a lot more. Now, both of these phones being flagship Samsung smartphones, they have a lot in common. So this comparison is going to be a lot about the difference between these two form factors rather than these two phones specifically. Like, they've both got essentially the same software, One UI 3.0, and they have almost the exact same specs as well. Snapdragon 865 Plus with an Adreno 650 GPU, 12 gigabytes of RAM, both are 5G, and they even both have the same battery capacity at 4500 milliamps. It is worth noting though that even though they have the same battery capacity, their actual battery lives do differ and the Note is better. And I feel like it's for two reasons. The first is that the Fold just has a bigger screen, and bigger screens require more power than smaller ones. And second is because of the special form factor of the Fold, they've had to split the battery into two modules. And because batteries are just more efficient when they're bigger, this will affect the battery life as well as the charge time in a negative way. The battery life on the Fold isn't that bad, but it is noticeably worse than the Note, which has a comfortably all-day battery life. I feel like the only real difference, like specs-wise, between these two phones is that the Note has expandable SD card storage while the Fold doesn't, which I know is a big deal to a lot of people, so if that's something you're into, then that is definitely something to consider. But what I feel like really sets these phones apart from both each other and other phones is that they both kind of have gimmicks. And by gimmicks, I just mean that they both have things about them that make them different from a normal phone. So with the Fold, obviously it folds and unfolds. Pretty simple. And with the Note, you got the S Pen. So we'll talk about the S Pen first, and basically it's just a stylus that stores right into the body of the phone. You can use it to draw, take notes, or even just use it in place of your finger for more precision when you're tapping. And I actually found myself using it a lot just for that purpose because sometimes those buttons get really small and my fingers are fat, so it's just nice to have that option. And of course, because it's Samsung, they had to bake in some gimmicks as well, like being able to use the S Pen as kind of a wand to switch between camera modes or use it as a remote trigger. And they've also added some features that I think are more useful, like the handwriting detect, which is surprisingly good at recognizing even really bad handwriting like mine. So overall with the S Pen, while I think it's really neat that they've been able to fit the stylus inside the phone while still having all of these great specs, I personally have not really found the S Pen to be all that useful. And I've said this before, but while the Note is a large phone, it's still a phone and I find it pretty cramped for actual handwriting. While the Fold, on the other hand, is able to unfold, giving you a tablet-like experience that you can bring anywhere you go. And the bigger screen is just super nice to have, especially for playing games or watching videos, although you will find it hard to find any piece of content that does fill up the entire screen. And that's kind of foreshadowing my biggest issue about this phone, but I'll talk about that later. The big screen though, combined with the Fold having possibly the best speakers on any smartphone, makes this bar none the best content consumption experience on any phone. The bigger screen also allows for better multitasking. You can have up to 3 apps open at one time, and Samsung has made it really easy to adjust the orientation of the different apps. And while I feel like this phone does multitasking better than any other phone, I still don't find it to be that useful. Mostly because when you bring up the keyboard, it takes up half the screen and then you can't really see it anyways. I feel like the best thing about it being able to physically fold and not just have a big screen is that you kind of have a built-in kickstand. And I found it especially useful for watching videos, using the timer, propping up the flashlight, and even using it as a kickstand for the camera. Samsung also tries to take advantage of the folding aspect by including what they call flex mode, where certain apps will just have kind of different functionality if you introduce a fold into the screen. And while all that folding stuff is really cool and all, this form factor does have its drawbacks as well. The first, and I guess most obvious, is the weight. The Z Fold 2 weighs 282 grams versus the 208 of the Note. And I know that really doesn't sound like a lot, but if you hold these two phones like side by side, the Fold just feels so much denser and clunkier and just significantly more brick-like than the Note does. And I feel like it's really tough that I have to describe the Fold as clunky because, well, it's like the bleeding edge of smartphone technology. But at the end of the day, if you're holding both of these phones in your hands, one of them feels really elegant, refined, and nice, and it's not the Fold. Another drawback of this new form factor, at least for me, is that you have to have two screens, which at first sounds like a good thing because, you know, you get two screens in one phone. Like, that sounds like a deal. But I just personally found it really annoying that you have to set up two home screens, and it's just really hard to remember where everything is. And you can't even set them to be the same because one is super narrow and one is super wide, which also incidentally makes it really hard to find good wallpapers that work for both. The two different screens also have two different refresh rates. The main screen is 120 Hz while the cover display is 60. And honestly, like when you're switching between the two screens, the difference is pretty jarring. Like when you go from the main display to the cover display, it almost feels like it's lagging or something. So the third, and I think the most important con of this new form factor is incompatibility, both physically and in the software. Like being such a new form factor, you're really limited on what kinds of cases and other accessories will work with this phone. And with the software, a lot of apps just don't really know what to do with this irregular aspect ratio and just don't really fit well into the screen. And that's true for both the main display and the cover display. Now you can alter the aspect ratio of apps as well as a bunch of other stuff in GoodLock, and believe me, I tried playing around in there to make stuff work, but every solution I found just felt more like a compromise. Like you might fix one problem, but then it would introduce other problems. Because at the end of the day, one screen is too narrow while the other screen is too wide. And this isn't necessarily Samsung's fault. Like if app developers made apps for this form factor, then it would all be fine. But my take on it is that as an end consumer, it doesn't matter to you whose fault it is as long as you have to deal with the problem. And you can watch my other videos on the Z Fold 2 to get a better idea of what I'm talking about. I've talked about it extensively, so I'll just leave it at that. And you can just avoid all of that headache about stuff not working by just going with a more traditional form factor like the Note. While you do lose like the wow factor that comes with having a folding phone and a mini tablet in your pocket, you don't get any of those problems I just mentioned with the Fold. There's only one screen and it's a great screen. And you get the peace of mind that pretty much every app and accessory maker out there has got you covered compatibility wise. Now it's not quite as much as like, let's say, the iPhones, but it is worlds better than the Z Fold 2. Now, the last thing I'll talk about before the conclusion is the cameras. And this is just another area that kind of peeves me about the Fold. Like, even though the Fold is the more expensive device by a significant margin, it has the worst camera system. It's the same one that's on the Note 20 non-Ultra version. Now, to be fair, the difference isn't actually that big. They have the same 12 megapixel ultra wide, but the Note has the 108 megapixel main sensor and periscope zoom lens, while the Fold has the regular 12 megapixel main sensor and non-periscope zoom lens. So the actual performance of the two camera systems is pretty close. The 108 megapixels of the Note 20 Ultra is such a gimmick, like it's nowhere near sharp enough to resolve that level of detail. Like it's a little bit sharper than the regular 12 megapixels, but only a little bit. And while the periscope zoom lens does indeed have more range than the regular one on the Fold, it's not really something that I or anyone else I really know uses on a regular basis. They also both have the exact same 10 megapixel selfie cameras, but I will give a slight edge to the Fold because you can flip the main cameras around to be the selfie cameras instead. And it's just really nice to have the ultra wide available for ultra wide selfies. So like practically speaking, it's really not that big of a deal, but it's just really frustrating that the Z Fold 2 is supposed to be Samsung's most premium phone, but they released a cheaper phone right alongside it that had better cameras. Like I know it's petty, but I feel like if I'm paying the most, I expect the most Samsung has to offer on all fronts, especially on something as important as the cameras. So I know this video kind of seemed like I was really critical of the Fold, and I was, but I am genuinely impressed with Samsung for continuing to push the envelope of what is possible with smartphones. I definitely do think that folding phones do have a place in the future because you really are gaining a lot in terms of getting all that extra extra screen real estate. But at the same time, as of right now, I feel like you're also losing a lot in terms of everyday usability. Like a lot of stuff just might not work the way that you're expecting, and you're just gonna have to live with it. I mentioned this in my last video about the Fold, but I also think it doesn't help that I don't think that these problems are going to be solved anytime soon. There just aren't enough people with Folds out there for app developers to have the incentive to put all those resources towards making a foldable phone app. And all of that is not even mentioning all the durability concerns that comes with a phone having this many moving parts. Now, so far, I haven't had any issues with durability, but it hasn't really been that long. And these folding screens have only been around for like 2 years, so the maximum anybody could have had it at this point is 2 years, which is fine, but I know people who keep their phones for like 4 or even 5 years. So this might not be the best option for people who like to keep their phone for a really long time. Oh yeah, and there's no water resistance of any kind either. On the other hand, the Note 20 Ultra is the latest in a long line of the tried and true glass slab phone. And I feel like it's one of the best versions of those. It's a pretty mature form factor at this point, and they've ironed out most of the issues with it. And the Note 20 Ultra is just an overall very, very solid phone that just isn't really going to give you any problems. But coming back to the comparison between these two phones, I feel like the decision between them is ultimately going to be one between the two different form factors rather than these two phones specifically. Like I said at the beginning of the video, they have pretty much the same specs. They're both Samsung phones running the same software. But personally, after using both of these phones, I am going to stick with old reliable and go with the Note. That's just my opinion though, and if you still want to go for the Fold, then go for it. I'm not saying that you couldn't get by with the Fold if you wanted to, I'm just saying it's not for me. If you guys still have any questions about these two phones, then leave it in the comment section down below and I'd be happy to answer them. Remember to smash that like button, and if you enjoy content like this, think about subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss anything. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace!